Hello, my name is Jordan Smith, and for this presentation, I will discuss the origins and influences of Afro Arabs in the Eastern Arab Gulf, also historically known as Al Bahrain in Arabic. Today, the Eastern Arab Gulf consists of Kuwait, Qatar, Oman, Bahrain, and the United Arab Emirates and the eastern portion of Saudi Arabia. Before I continue, I should mention that this focus on the eastern portion of the Arab Gulf mainly centers on the Afro-Arab ancestry from the Swahili coast, which consists of modern-day Tanzania, Mozambique, and Kenya. There are several other African diasporic groups in the Arabian Peninsula, especially while considering the events of the trans-Saharan slave trade, Saudi Arabia being home to many Islamic holy sites, and the sub-Saharan empire expansion into the region, for example, the Aksum Empire. The term Arab Gulf was coined by the Gulf Cooperation Council, an intergovernmental political and economic union, which is similar to the European Union. The countries under this pact include Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, Oman, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain. And the citizens of this region collectively call themselves Khaliji, which translates to the people of the Gulf. Despite the geopolitical distinction, southern Iraq, which is right above Kuwait, is also culturally similar to the Arab Gulf and also has one of the largest populations of Afro Arab descendants. The history and origins of Afro Arabs in the Eastern Arabian Peninsula begins along the Swahili coast. Zanzibar, an island off the coast of modern day Tanzania, was one of the main channels through which enslaved Africans came from the Horn of Africa and Central Africa and were transferred to supply the markets of Eastern Arabia, Iraq, Persia, and even parts of India. East Africa has for many decades been a significant source of enslaved Africans, but the exploitation did not begin on a large scale until the Omani conquest of the Swahili coast, which began towards the end of the 17th century. Some of the ethnic groups included involved in the slave trade included the Zanj, Umbere, and the Swahili people um, through Omani ports such as Muscat, Sur, Batina. Many enslaved Africans were held for domestic use if they were not resold or shipped elsewhere. There is little record of the number of African slaves acquired throughout time. However, the slave trade has a tremendous impact on the economy of coastal towns like Dubai, Doha, Abu Dhabi, and Kuwait City. Today, Afro Arabs of the Eastern Gulf are largely assimilated into Arab society. Gulf-born Arabs of African descent have historically had an impact on much of the culture, politics, and economy in these countries as we see them today. For example, emirs or rulers in Arabic, such as Sheikh Nawaf al Ahmed al Sabah and Sheikh Saad al Salim al Sabah, were responsible for the implementation of the modern political system that we see in Kuwait today. Gulf-born Arabs of African descent are also disproportionately represented in the music and film industries, which accounts for about half of those in said industries uh, having some ancestral connection to Eastern Africa. Some of the most infamous Arab actors on the right include Said Al-Faraj, a well-known pioneer in the acting industry of the Arabian Gulf. Music genres in the Arab Gulf with East African origins include lewa and fan al tambura, which often features musical instruments such as the al manhur, um, which is a cloth worn around the waist to create a rattled sound. The monsodo, which is a drum from the Swahili coast, and snippets of the Swahili language used throughout different songs in the Gulf. Eastern African mysticism is also largely influential of the music culture of the Arab Gulf, which includes the belief that instruments and rhythms are capable of accessing and contacting possessed spirits. Despite assimilation, the legacy of slavery in the Eastern Arab Gulf can be seen in the creation of national heritages, which embodies native Bedouin values and refutes any African influence. Many Gulfern Arabs of East African descent have historically had familial ties to the elite Bedouin and Bedouin settler families, which largely attributes to their higher social economic statuses today in comparison to other non-indigenous groups to the region. This is a form of cultural hegemony supported by the neo-tribal elites of the Arab Gulf today. Contemporarily, Gulf Arabs of African descent generally lack the ability to articulate their racial and ethnic background, as well as being unable to express a strategic identity or engage in serious political discussions in relation to their ethnic identity. Instead, they live in a complete state of denial about their African roots and insist that they are Arabs and Muslim and therefore not African. This denial of African roots largely reminds me of the several arguments related to the Palmer reading of defining and studying African diasporas around the world, especially since although many Gulf Arabs of African descent may identify themselves as Arab, many still seek to maintain some ethnic identity between Black uh, Gulf Arabs. For example, in places like Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Bahrain, Black Gulf Arabs typically refer to themselves as Khawal, which means uncle in Arabic. There is much more to be explored about how Black Gulf Arabs seek to identify themselves. Uh, this Despite Gulf Arabs of East African descent being heavily assimilated into Eastern Arab Gulf societies, anti-Blackness largely exists through xenophobia against non-Gulf African Arabs and other sub-Saharan Africans. For example, in 2018, a Kuwaiti TV show called Black Asmara came under fire for using blackface to portray Sudanese people, a country that is often identified as culturally Arab but racially Black. The portrayal depicted the Sudanese as lazy and ignorant while also making fun of their dialect. Furthermore, the anti-blackness via xenophobia seen through the kafala system, which is an oppressive and hierarchical system uh, used to employ expats from around the world. For example, Westerners from the countries like the United States, the UK, and Canada typically are given higher pay, assigned better living conditions, and are treated almost as in similar respect as other Gulf citizens. Other expats, for example, those from India, Ethiopia, and the Philippines, are often given low-wage jobs, employed as manual laborers or domestic workers, and often have their passports taken away from their employers in order to keep them in the country. There are several accounts, for example, of Ethiopian and Ghanaian domestic workers reporting physical abuse and having been told racial slurs by their employees or employers. For future research, I propose that we study the trend of African ancestry of those of African descent in the Arab Gulf and the cultural influence that they've uh, had on the region. Much of the African influences in the Arab Gulf is claimed by other Arabs as being inherently Bedouin or native Arab, and this needs to be further explored. The proposed question that I have for the future is what are some of the distinctions between the experiences of African diasporic groups in the Arab Gulf?